Arlene Adam, who we knew for many years as our resources for gifting and chocolate and all things good. And now she has a great new venture. So I'd like to introduce Arlene so she can tell us a little bit more about her new venture. And thank you for sponsoring today.
Well, thank you so much. So my name's Arlene Adam. I'm with Liffey Biffy. How did you pivot from COVID? When the pandemic struck, none of us could anticipate the long-term effects it would have on our lives. The loss of loved ones can never be underestimated nor forgotten. While the fortunate survivors piece together our new norm, it should be noted that while change is almost always difficult, it can also be a very good thing. I would like to share how an eclectic group of us pivoted in our careers as a result of COVID. It started when the business we represented closed our doors. So what happens when you combine a group of 6 women entrepreneurs with decades of sales and marketing experience, add a dynamic mother-son team who knows that physical disabilities should limit no one, a few beer and hot sauce connoisseurs with doctorates, a brother duo intent on healing bodies and souls in the midst of an opioid crisis, a down-to-earth humanitarian who wants to share his taste and zest of the world with his small community, and one very determined young lady who created a way to comfort both the internal and external wounds of children. Meet Liffey Biffy Inc., which means little fish, big fish. Our new company connects consumers and companies looking for something unique while supporting small, heart-driven businesses with some little fish who are ready to grow. Today's buyers deserve and require more choices. Most have adapted to online shopping, and yet the process to find anything different and unique is tedious and difficult. Small businesses have pivoted to an online presence to reach new customers, but without spending a fortune on advertising and hiring multiple experts to guide them, it can be an overwhelming and often unsuccessful journey. At Liffey Biffy Inc., our mission is to link arms with small businesses, our little fish, and help them to navigate these new waters. We introduce consumers and companies to a curated selection of remarkable businesses with special pricing while sharing the story behind their business. We promote our little fish for 12 weeks and then present other small businesses that deserve your attention. So come back often to hear the stories of our latest merchants. Today, more than ever, it matters why and who we shop with, and consumers are making careful choices around their own principles. As consumers, we have learned the value in sending simple but meaningful gifts to loved ones, not just on special occasions, but because every day is special and valuable. Companies who are looking to start a new gifting program or are not happy with the return on investment of their existing program will find unique ways to send gifts for client appreciation, referral partners, and employee team building. COVID may have taken much from all of us, but it also gave us a new perspective, a time to reflect on what really matters, and the ability to transform ourselves when needed. I hope that you have been able to embrace some positive changes, and I'll be in touch with you to learn from your experiences.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arlene. And I know that information is all on the Exton Chamber website right now too. So, as people have need for gifts, or probably have people that might be similar stories, they could send them your way as well, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. I'd now like to be able to introduce Christine Zaccarelli, who is the Executive Director of the Crime Victim Center of Chester County. She's passionate for everybody she serves, as well as a huge contributor to the Exton Chamber, especially with the Nonprofit Council. And I'm really excited that she offered her expertise today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chris Zaccarelli.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Laurie, for the opportunity to present to y'all today. You may have heard, well, first of all, I think expertise is a little bit of an exaggeration. I am new to the trauma-informed world. It has something that I have become passionate about because I realize those may not know I'm an attorney by trade, a recovering attorney, I like to tell people. And I was a legal aid attorney for 15 years. So the majority of my clients at Legal Aid, I practiced family law. So family law cases in and of themselves are traumatic. But when you add that my clients were all living at 125% or below of poverty level, they typically were not in two-parent households. So there was kind of by definition of what I did, a lot of trauma going on there. And we were not trauma informed. That concept had never been introduced to us from law school until the day I left Legal Aid. It's not something we ever thought about, and it's something we should have been thinking about a lot. So part of my mission at CDC has become to bring this concept to folks, just to get us thinking about it, about how we interact with each other. I was looking for a video, like a 3-minute video that would kind of sum it all up. Well, that doesn't exist because, but they do exist for different sectors of professional, like, you know, the schools, healthcare. But for everyday businesses, there's not a whole lot out there that kind of summarizes what we need to know and what we can do. So I have put together a slideshow, and I have 15 minutes, Laura. I forget how long I have. You're on mute.
We don't have a lot of people here, so 15 to 20 minutes, and we can ask questions afterwards. And if people
Okay.
for me to turn it off during the question and answer time, I can do that as well. But I just would like to have some type of video to share with folks for business, you know, about this. So.
Okay. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint, and if y'all have questions as we're going through this, please, please, please just unmute yourselves and ask. It's hard for me to do the PowerPoint and monitor the chat at the same time, but if you have something in the chat, Laurie, maybe you can keep an eye on that. But I really, really would love for this to be an interactive discussion about this topic. And I started by saying, you may have heard in the news that Governor Wolf wants to make Pennsylvania a trauma-informed state. And what that means is that this information will basically be pervasive in every aspect of services and business that we do, so that our entire state is adopting these principles as opposed to just pockets of it where we think it's particularly relevant. Okay. Okay. So this is, and again, this presentation is usually about an hour. So I'm going to sink it into about, 10 minutes or so we can have some time for questions and discussions. But this is a basic definition of trauma. And one thing about trauma that I've learned in getting more familiar with this material is we typically think about trauma as an event, a car accident, a violent crime, something that is a single event that occurs over, one period of time. But trauma is so much more than that. It can also be something like neglect as a child, where you're experiencing it for years, or an experience that is just something that lasts weeks and weeks or even years, as child abuse and things like that. Then there's the traumatic event is experienced either physically or emotionally as harmful or life-threatening. And then the effect, the traumatic experiences result in lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So that's really the key, that the traumatic experience, whether it be a single event or a series of events that lasted a lifetime, are going to result in those lasting adverse effects. So someone who has gone through significant trauma, their brain is going to be wired differently from someone who has not. And speaking for myself as someone who has not experienced significant childhood trauma or trauma in my adult life, in that term of, we all deal with stress. We're not talking about the daily stress here. We're talking about trauma. So my brain is going to work differently than someone who, say, grew up in a physically abusive home. So that's really, this is kind of the bare bones of what is trauma and what exactly are we talking about when we talk about being trauma informed. These are some different types of trauma incident versus chronic trauma. As I mentioned, it can be a single incident, or it can be something that happened a long period of time. Developmental trauma, trauma that occurs while you're growing up, things that are happening in your household. Historical, generation, or collective trauma. Racial trauma fits into the historical trauma. Poverty can fit into the generational trauma. The collective trauma is something we go through as a group. 9/11 is an example of collective trauma. The pandemic is an example of collective trauma. We are all going through it right now and experiencing it differently. We have post-traumatic stress disorder in this slide because a lot of people think when you think about trauma and trauma informed, that means that you have to be aware of PTSD. And while it is a very small part of trauma, that is not the main thing that we're talking about here. We're not talking about only folks who have been diagnosed with PTSD, that we need to have a different lens as we're looking at those folks. It's way broader than just post-traumatic stress disorder. Who is, I can't see you guys a lot, but who is familiar with ACEs? Anyone? Laurie, a little bit? Okay. So there was a study done back in the 1990s, and it correlated these 10 things, and they're called Adverse Childhood Experience Score. That's where ACEs comes from. These 10 things that children go through during their development. And the study found that they had profound impacts on their physical health in their adulthood. So the higher the ACEs score, the higher the potential for physical manifestations of this trauma in their bodies as they got older. And Nadine Burke is the key researcher in this. And what she has started to do for years now is change how she treats kids to try to make sure that these ACEs are not going to have that negative impact on folks. And the 10 types of trauma, and you basically, what you do is when you're dealing with anyone, whether it be a child, an adult, a senior, you can take their ACEs score by counting, literally counting how many of these things they went through in their childhood. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, mental illness in their family, and mental illness in their family, meaning that it impacted them on a day-to-day basis. An incarcerated relative that was a caregiver, typically, substance abuse, living in an abusive relationship household, or divorce. And they found that anyone who has an ACEs score of 4 and above can manifest these negative, basically life impacts as they get older. This is just kind of the science. We do, like I mentioned, we do a trauma 101, and this is, we get into a lot more of the detail. And these are the things that I'm still learning, frankly. But this is impact of stress on the brain and how your brain can, as I mentioned before, it literally gets wired differently. These are the areas of the brain that are impacted by stress. And as you can see, the prefrontal cortex, executive functioning, organization and analysis, and decision making. Those are really, really important things day to day when you're dealing with life challenges that can be negative impacted by stress. Your alarm system is also off kilter, processing emotions, and your memory can be impacted as well. This is just another slide about the things that our prefrontal cortex, again, this is negatively impacted by stress. These are the things that prefrontal cortex helps us do. And one of the Resilience is a movie. It's about an hour long that talks about in detail about this trauma. And one of the examples in the movie is that kids that have undergone significant childhood trauma, or adults who are undergoing significant trauma or have gone through it, their brains are sometimes wired so that, you know, the response that you get when you're crossing the street and I used to do this, I went to the University of Pittsburgh, we had a bus lane that went up our street. So you knew, like, you just don't wander out into the street because that bus ain't stopping. And every once in a while you're not paying attention and you jump back and you're like, holy crap, I almost got hit by a bus. Folks that are undergoing trauma or have gone through trauma, their brains are constantly in that mode, constantly in the jumping back, oh my gosh, I almost got hit by a bus mode. So think about how difficult it would be to get through the normal everyday craziness that is our lives if your brain is always in that heightened sense of reaction. And that's what can happen when folks have undergone trauma. So this is a tool that we can, and I think that if you think about those that are around us, some of our customers, those that use our services, for us here at CVC, it's our clients. When I was at Legal Aid, it was my clients. I experienced this a lot when I was at Legal Aid, and I wish I would have had this graphic on my desk. I would have like laminated it and taken it with me. Because we all have a window of tolerance. You know, we all go through stress all the time, but you're calm, you can access your reason and emotion, you're mentally engaged, you're having a conversation, you know, you're able to whatever task is in front of you. And in the situation where I was, where it was a custody case or an unemployment case or whatever the situation may be, you are there to help me with your case, you're good to go. You can also then go into what we refer to as hyperarousal. You're overreacting. You have unclear thoughts. You're distressed. You can't calm down. I regularly remember telling my clients, I just need you to calm down. And I now know how completely useless that was, because they were in this hyperarousal state. Telling them to calm down just made them that much more stressed out, because they knew they couldn't do what me, their attorney, needed them to do. So when someone is in this state that may not make sense to us, why are they getting so upset over something that to me doesn't seem that unusual? It could be because they've experienced trauma and they're in a hyper-aroused state. And then you have the exact opposite, where they're shutting down, they're depressed, they're lethargic, they're numb, they're not motivated. And I also experienced this by clients. I don't understand why this client won't call me back. Just call me back. What is the big deal? I just need to talk to you about something. They've shut down because it's just too difficult to comprehend perhaps losing custody of their children, or dad getting a lot more time than he has now. So they just shut down and they ignore it. And so these are tools that we can use, you know, recognizing when someone is out of their window of tolerance. And this can be also just stress induced. We all know when we get to a point where we're like, okay, I need to do something. I don't know what it is right now, but I am not in my window of tolerance. And I kind of, since I've been, you know, teaching this, I do kind of find myself, oh, you are so outside your window right now. It is not a good thing. So these tools are not only tools that we can use for others, but they're also tools that we can use for ourselves. Sensitivities around trauma disclosure. I tossed this slide in here. We do usually include it, but there, you know, particularly with sexual assault, there's a lot of discussion about, well, why didn't they just tell? Or child abuse, why didn't you just disclose what was happening to you? Wouldn't it just have been easier? And these are just some of the reasons why people do not do that. And why, and then, you know, at the bottom there too, be concerned about our ability to handle their safety once they've disclosed something to us. This one was used in terms of an attorney-client relationship where they may be disclosing something to you that they haven't disclosed to anybody before. But these are just some very, very common reasons for why people do not disclose trauma. And I wanted to share those with you. So this is also another great graphic to kind of keep in your mind as you're helping yourself and as you perhaps are helping others navigate through trauma. The iceberg is what we see, right? This is what we see up here, but this is what we don't see. You know, you see those graphics, you don't know what other people are going through right now. the majority of an iceberg is under the water that we cannot see. So that's why I think this graphic is so powerful. Under here is what you're going to be seeing. They have trauma reminders, triggers, as we refer to. If you've heard the phrase, it seems like that word triggers is getting used a little bit more often now. And a lot of times folks don't quite understand what we mean by that. And it's simply literally a trigger that's going to make you go back to a period of trauma. It could be, if your mother was physically abusive, it could be the scent of her perfume, or somebody, the smell of something cooking, if, something like that. So triggers, difficulty with trust and attachment, particularly for people in authority, not being able to regulate your emotions, having a much more sensitive internal alarm system. And then, as we referred to before, going into shutting down mode, and then coping mechanisms. All of that stuff could be underneath someone who is experiencing trauma. These are just some, and again, this is like I took bits and pieces of the PowerPoint. So I'm sorry if it seems like I'm jumping around a little bit, but this is kind of the highlights of trauma-informed thinking. These are things that can re-traumatize folks. Especially for us at CDC, we are a part of the criminal justice system for a significant portion of our clients. And we are also a part of the social services system for agencies that are providing social services. And so where you see on the left their system, that's kind of what we at CDC refer to, but that could be applicable to anything. For Fran, it could be the insurance system. Where you're, trying to navigate through an insurance claim, which should seem like a relatively simple thing to do. But folks that have to continually retell their story, being treated as a number, procedures that require disrobing can obviously be re-traumatizing, being seen as their label, an addict, a schizophrenic. Laurie had mentioned at our last nonprofit council meeting, wanting to get the chamber more involved with ALICE, the asset limited income constrained employed model of the United Way. And when I was working at Legal Aid, we assisted folks who were experiencing homelessness. And I kept saying, folks experiencing homelessness. And a friend of mine said, why do you say it like that? Why don't you just say they're homeless? And I said, because they're not homeless. That's not who they are. That's not what they're about. At the particular moment when we were helping them, they happened to be experiencing homelessness. And that helps to take away the trauma because it lets them identify, I'm not homeless. It's just what I'm going through right now. It's not who I am. So being seen as their label can be very, very powerful. Not giving folks a choice in service or treatment, and not having an opportunity to give feedback about their experience. Later on in one of the slides, we talk about, we are the experts in our own life. And especially a lot of times as an attorney, we assume we know better, but we don't. My clients were the expert in their lives, not me. And same thing at CDC. So we want to empower our clients at CDC to give them choices and give them the opportunity to give feedback about how we're doing, and not just assume that we're doing everything that we're supposed to be. And then on the right-hand side is more about a personal relationship. They don't feel seen. The violating trust is huge. Earning trust is very difficult. And once that trust is violated, it can be next to impossible to get back. Failure to ensure emotional safety, not being collaborative, again, not having an opportunity and choice, doing things for someone rather than with them, and then use of punitive treatment, coercive practices, and oppressive language. So these are some trauma, there are 6 trauma-informed principles: safety, choice, empowerment, and I can't remember the next 3, they're on the next slide. And these are just some things as it applies to each of the informed principles as to what you can do. Being aware of your surroundings, literally helping to locate exit safety measures. And then, as you can see, there's just lots of different tools under each of these principles. But it's helpful to frame the what's next question. I know when we do these trainings, a lot of times it's, okay, I understand this, I get it. What can I do? How can I implement this into my life? And these are 6 areas that you can think about safety, choice, empowerment, collaboration, trustworthiness, and being aware of inequities. Racial inequities in this country has always been an issue, and it's finally coming to the forefront. Recognizing that as a white woman, I have privilege. It's not my fault I have privilege, but I do. And so recognizing that when I'm dealing with others that may not share the same privilege that I do, and seeing their world through a different lens, not through my lens, can be very, very powerful. And again, we talked about the transparency, the trustworthiness, being transparent, don't make promises you can't keep, and prioritizing things for your clients or your customers above your own. So those are the 6 kind of the framework by which you can move forward with trauma-informed principles. And then lastly, this is kind of the takeaway that I would love for you to all have from today, especially when I was an attorney. And even in our everyday life, when folks are frustrating us, or they're not allowing us to get our work done, or in my clients' cases, they weren't listening to me, they weren't doing what I needed them to do. In my head, I would think, oh, what is wrong with you? Why can't you just call me back? What is wrong with you? Why can't you get to court on time? How hard is it? It's not rocket science. And what I should have been saying in my head is, what happened to you? What happened to you that you don't have access to a car? What's going on in your life right now that you're so busy and so swamped that you cannot call me about your custody case, which is one of the most important things going on in your life right now, because there's nothing more important than our children. And so having that lens is something that can be crucial when we're out, just out in our community, and just trying to change our mindset to a judgmental what's wrong with you, and shifting it to what happened to you and how can I help. And that's it for the PowerPoint. I just want to share one specific experience that I had while I was at Legal Aid, that as I was learning more about being trauma informed, really stuck with me. I had a particular client who was in a violent, abusive relationship. She moved up here, and her husband, the ex-husband, father of her child, still saw the child. The child was never abused, so the dad had regular custody and visitation. She was exchanging the child at a local convenience store, and dad would regularly be late, and it drove her crazy, understandably. But that would mean that her child had to sit in the car, and then sometimes dad wouldn't show. And so the child would know, I was supposed to be with daddy today, but daddy didn't show. And the child was only 7 or 8 years old. They were relatively young. And so the client worked somewhere that had access to a daycare facility. And I said, well, of course, it's logical, just have him pick the child up at where you work, because then the child won't have to, she won't know whether daddy showed up or not. They won't have any idea. If they show, great. If not, oh well. But for that client, the place of employment was a safe haven. It was somewhere that, because of the physical abuse, she did not want him anywhere near it, because she felt safe and knowing that he would not be there. And instead of using and saying, okay, what happened to you that you don't think that that location is appropriate, my lawyer brain was like, don't be ridiculous. And my mom brain, because I had kids too at the time, this is silly. We should just switch the custody exchange. This isn't rocket science. And that's just kind of one example of how I was not being trauma informed, and how I should have treated that differently, and respected that she was the expert in her own life. And if she wanted the exchange point to be at a certain convenience store, I should have been arguing to the judge to limit his custody if he was going to keep not showing up or keep showing up so late. And that's just kind of one example, a real life example of what we mean by being trauma informed, and how we can kind of change what we do to make the ACEs and trauma in general have lesser of an impact on those around us than it has to. And I'd love to take questions. I also, before I forget, want to give a shout out to Fran Shaw at Miller's Insurance for being our community partner this year at CDC. We are very grateful for her support.
Thanks, Chris. I do have a question. Do you know is there a percentage of people that have been impacted by trauma? And there's so many different ways probably to answer that. I realize that's a big data question, and there's many ways that we may all suffer from trauma, but I'm just curious if you have any statistical information.
Yeah, I don't know. I do remember seeing somewhere, but I can't remember the specifics of folks that have ACEs scores. So that ACEs score is kind of the benchmark about how we measure who's been impacted by trauma. And I don't remember what the statistics were of how many people, as I mentioned, having 4 or more is kind of the benchmark for the negative health impacts. And I don't remember what the percentage was.
I do think it's very interesting because it's probably higher than I think it is. And it just does kind of change your perspective on how to treat people. And of course, we talk all the time about trying not to be judgmental. And some days that's a minute by minute challenge. And I just probably have that all recorded. So sorry, you all know that about me now.